This is Devin Wood, the first employee here at Janus. He originally joined to help finish up our first 50cc Halcyon builds, but he was also instrumental in starting the Janus 250 line. What started out as a 2-week internship that quickly turned into a nearly 3.5-year job that saw him wear many hats and ultimately started him down the path in the motorcycle industry, where he now works for Harley-Davidson as a senior supply chain analyst. To celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the Janus 250 line, we thought it would be great to sit down with him and reminisce about the early days of Janus and what it was like taking a small motorcycle shop and turning it into the new American motorcycle manufacturer it is today.
I'm joined this evening by Devin Wood, who I'm going to go ahead and say it. We call him Due here at Janus Motorcycles because he was the second Devin at Janus, and so Italian for two is Due. And he rode a Marini 3.5 along with an old Honda CB 350. He's still Due to me. But we're joined by Devin, who was our first Janus employee. And so this is going to be a kind of a trip down memory lane. We're going to talk about the launch of the 250. We were still wrapping up 50cc production, weren't we?
Yeah, we were. Yeah, I built, I think, the last 4 or 5 50s. The first week I was at Janus.
So let's just start with, how did you hear about Janus? How did you get in the door? And kind of the very beginning of the story. Where are you from, and what's your background?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Richard. Devin Wood. I am a senior supply chain analyst at Harley-Davidson, but started my career at Janus Motorcycles. I was trying to think back on how I originally first heard about Janus, and I've not been able to find the specific article. It was an article on the 50cc, the first one, JM. That one was JM001, but 50cc version, right? We didn't call that one anything different.
The very first one. Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, so it was an article about that, and I can remember the email, though, that I sent you, and I sent it to you specifically because it was inquire at Janus Motorcycles. I think I used the old line, like, I don't care what you want me to do, I'll sweep the floors if that's all you want. I'll come down and do that, because Goshen was like 2.5 hours from my house in Michigan. But it was just far enough that it was far away, but not something that was unattainable, like in California. Or
you applied to as an internship. You're from Southern Michigan, Eaton Rapids, is that right?
Yeah, from Eaton Rapids, Michigan. I don't think it was even applying for an internship. It was. I emailed you, and you were like, "Yes, we would love to have you come down." It was supposed to be a week. It was supposed to be a week internship.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you were there the first week. Actually, it was an internship with Devin, and I think you came down on like Thursday to just see how things were going. But it was that very, very early stage of Fifth Street where it was right out of the back of the dry cleaners. So
so at that point we were in the back of the building, in the smallest portion. It was a loft on the top floor where we ran the business on the top floor. I did marketing and sales and design at that point. I think Devin was really building bikes and managing fabrication.
Yeah, I can remember the first day I showed up, and it was we were prepping motors to go into 50s. We probably had, I don't know, 5-10 motors that came in that we needed to prep to go into the 50s. And that was, I brought my own toolbox because I'm not sure we had that many tools for the shop at that point. Brought my own toolbox and started doing the little modifications that we had to do to make everything work.
And an order of 10 engines was a big order for us.
That was a big order. I think we got a pair of scissors with that order that are still probably Yeah. So it was just a small thing. We had the wire rack stands to put the bikes on. There were 2 stations, even though there were only 2 guys working on the bikes. And it's honestly still amazing that you guys do most of the production in that space. It's a lot more optimized now than it was. The entire shop flow has been reorganize.
Well, we only had the one room really in the loading bay, and since then we now have the entire building, and we've been able to knock down walls and reorganize it. At this point, I think it's really about as optimized as it can be for that building, and we're busting at the seams. So tell us a little bit more. So what did you started off kind of doing really everything, and well, you kind of when you left Janice, you were still pretty much doing everything. But tell us about what we first had you doing, because I can't remember, and then walk us through how that progressed.
First, it was assembly hand. That was the job description because there wasn't really anything left. You did most of the front of office stuff, and we needed to build motorcycles to make any money. So that's the way it started, and it got to a point where I was in business school, and we grew enough. We were building enough of the 50s that we could not quite turn a profit, but be able to look at going into a larger expenditure in the motorcycle space. And I think one of my more favorite Janus moments is the interview, which occurred at, I believe, the end of the second week. I was supposed to be there for 1 week. I stayed for 2. And at the end of the second week was my what I would like to call my official interview, which was at Common Spirits, which is the best bar in Goshen, I still believe, right across the street from Janus, very conveniently located. And it was one of those things where it was, what do we need to do to have you stay? We want to have you stick around, which I was just ecstatic to be included at that point in time. Nothing cooler could have came up for me at that point.
And you were a motorcyclist,
yeah,
and you and interested in this kind of thing already. And what were you studying?
I was studying business at that point, just general business. It transformed over the course of my time at Janus to supply chain, and that's eventually where it ended up. Still where my career is today in motorcycle supply chain, but that's where the idea formed of, this is something that I can turn into a career. And there was no better way than to be able to see a supply chain, from my perspective, grow from almost nothing to a fully formed company by the time I departed, making production motorcycles that go out to general consumers on a wide basis.
Yeah, so tell us about that. Like, what was, the 50? We were toward the end of the production run of the 50cc at that point, and that was pretty well fleshed out as it was. Tell us about the transition from the 50cc to the 250, which, I mean, honestly, you probably remember. I've talked about it so many times that I barely remember the whole. I think you'll be able to give us some extra perspective, and also some of the challenges that we faced with some of the issues we had with the 50cc that we wanted to improve, that we needed to improve as we launched the 250.
Yeah, it was a very stark transition, because I can remember a lot of conversations around that point in time of how do we launch a new model. I can remember some of the initial conversations we had were trying to source an engine. It's not an easy thing to do, even for an established motorcycle manufacturer. So I can remember some of the first conversations I had with you during the first weeks I worked at Janus were, how do we source a powertrain? The first batch was from Lifan, if I remember correctly, and you'll have to remember where the current source of the 250 is from. But after many versions of importing those motors on a trial basis, that's where we landed.
Little company Bashan that we they have a U.S. importer, and we just have the most a fantastic relationship with John out in Ontario, California, who helps us bring them in. But I remember, we went through a lot of different versions. We just weren't happy with the Lifan or the Zongshen. And we were also hearing about other companies going through EPA with them and the issues that they were having. So any other challenges that you remember encountering as we made that transition?
Oh, the entire stop of production on the 50s, because we had limited resources. I mean, it's the underdog story of Janus in comparison to what I do on a daily basis. But the limited resources is an incredibly difficult thing to manage for a vehicle company, and especially a motorcycle company. So we had to be very selective on what we did, because we only had your time, my time, Devin's time. I think by that point in time, Ken Miller was in the picture,
Yep.
and Jordan and Grant doing video, but that was it to run an entire vehicle company. So I can remember the decision to stop production on the 50s to focus on the 250s.
So
And
just to develop it.
yeah, to develop the 250s was I'm still shocked by how quickly we were able to do it, but it was still a year-long process, I believe, but slightly
Mm-hmm.
longer than a year, I think, from the decision that we made to the actual launch flight of the Phoenix party. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was about a year of development that we were solely focused on that, and that was a big risk. We all didn't take paychecks during that time, or took severe severely discounted paychecks. There wasn't any of the startup like, oh yeah, we pay ourselves, we don't make a profit. There was just nothing to quite be there. So that was a challenge, and we all had to be really committed to that. There was no other way.
But I mean, obviously, we have you were really passionate about the project, like we were as well, and really saw something that a future in it. So
Oh yeah, there was no cooler internship early job I could have had in my career. We were building new production American motorcycles that from scratch, from a dry cleaning shop at that point, and on a month by month basis, we were expanding our capabilities from a college student perspective. There was no better internship experience that you could get.
tell us about the issue we ran into with the 50cc chassis, which happened when we were still in development with the 250.
Yes, the 50cc gusset issue, which was the source of many a long night of cardboard aided design at a CAG. At the Fifth Street mezzanine was the 250 frame gusset issue, and I'm not the most technically minded individual, I'll be honest, but I can remember a point where we were discussing the issue in detail, and you looked back at I think it was you'll have to remind me the exact title of the book, but it was a Reynolds, at least a Reynolds source informational book on the featherbed chassis.
It's right there on the shelf behind me.
And just several days later, you were reading through the Reynolds book, and you were like, oh, this happened on the Reynolds frame, and they did this about it. I'm interested to hear what you remember from that scenario, because it was a very uncertain time from a purchasing perspective, but from a technical perspective, it was all hands on deck.
Yeah, the short version of a traumatic story was that we were at Barber, if you remember,
Yes.
and we got a phone call from a customer who said that I mean, I can talk about this now because it's a decade ago or over a decade ago, but his chassis had cracked in a pretty dramatic way. Literally, both the down tubes on a cradle frame had separated under the steering head, and so we basically just said we got to stop. We got to figure this out immediately. And meanwhile, we were taking that the frame on the 50 and the 250 was based on the Norton featherbed chassis, famous chassis developed in the late 40s and early 50s by Rex McCandless. And we realized, well, at first we realized we didn't know what was going on, and we thought, oh, we got to fix this. We cannot continue to design with a similar frame until we solve this. So that I was reading this book, the Frame Man, about this famous English engineer and welder who worked for Reynolds Tubing, who made the chassis for Norton, and he recounted exactly the same issue that they ran into, and that it was a result of the frame gusset, which is a little sheet metal piece that provides rigidity for the steering head off of the down tubes, and that actually causes something called a stress riser. And without getting into too much detail about it creates all the stress in one location, which can break the frame. You want to distribute the stress over the whole chassis. And so that, along with finite element analysis in 3D CAD and the help of some other interns. We figured out what it was.
I believe it was through the Goshen grapevine of talented professionals that we met Chris.
Who I think was he started kind of interning with us, right?
Yeah. Chris interned. I think Chris's wife was in our group in Goshen, and she was like, "Oh, my husband's an engineer. I think he could do the finite element analysis." And we were like, "Great, that sounds like a perfect plan. Can he start tomorrow?" And she was like, "Actually, yes. Yes. He doesn't have anything to do tomorrow. That sounds like a great idea for him to occupy his time."
In conjunction with Ken Miller, we call him our engineer emeritus, an old retired engineer from Bendix out in South Bend, working together with all of us to try different solutions. And what we ended up with was a way to, in effect, weaken the gusset and distribute the load around the frame. And without going into too much detail, again, we kept throwing him, try this, and eventually we were able to. If you're familiar with the idea of finite element analysis, is it can highlight where there's a higher stress in the frame, and we were able to turn that red into a green and show that it was being distributed over the whole chassis. But we had it wasn't just to come out with the 250. That we had to redesign the 250 chassis, which was still, I think we had a prototype. At that point we had one of each, a Softail and a Hardtail Phoenix and a Halcyon chassis made, but we also had all the 50 cc's out there, and we wanted to stand behind those. So we ended up, Devin and I, splitting up the U.S. into the east, and I think it was the east and west, basically.
Those were some of my favorite road trips, believe it or not, that I think I've taken across the United States.
Oh yeah, you and I did one. Yes, right. You and I went to the southeast.
Yeah, southeast. We did Miami, down to Miami. That trip, which there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun highlights from that trip. Welding the plugs, which is what Richard's alluding to distribute that stress into the frames next to 1950s Rolls Royce. There was the first night in like Fort Myers or something where we stopped.
Yeah, we went swimming at Palm Beach.
Yeah, that was Palm Beach. We stopped in Palm Beach and we were just so tired. We drove like from Indiana to Palm Beach in a day, and we're like, we need to stop, but also we don't know where the hotel is. We just want to take one swim. And we got to this beach, and like I can remember the photophosphorescent plankton and thinking that is the coolest thing I've ever seen while I was in the water.
But anyway, we had to go around and fix all these chassis, and my memory, which I think really tells how far we've come, is Dewey and I were in the van. We had a welder in the back. We had the whole rig set up, and I am in the front seat while he's driving, wiring up a converter plug, to be able to run the welder off of a generator while we're driving, trying to find a electrical supply house to be able to do it. But we were able to get the time down, and we had a wonderful time visiting with all of the customers. And over the course of I don't know, I think it took us probably 4 or 5 months, Devin doing some, you and I doing some, and then going out. My family went out. I took the whole family along, and we repaired chassis out west.
You did. You took a vacation. I think that was like the first vacation you took at Janus, was you took your family out west and also did repairs at the same time. You had like an RV at that. I think you did an RV for that trip.
We got a little RV. We had a trailer with all the welding equipment in the back, and repaired them all. But it was a learning experience. We issued a full, and you and I worked on it. We issued a full NHTSA recall bulletin. Yep, and we did it. We took care of it, and then I think that's been one of those moments where, as a motorcycle, entrepreneur and designer, I just remember thinking, I cannot let this happen ever again.
No, it was a big wake up call that this is a real thing. We have a responsibility and we have to take care of this. And it went from making cool motorcycles in a small shop to that this is a real business, that there are real business concerns and they have to be addressed. And from a small company perspective, I don't know how we could have done it any better.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's one of those hurdles that to get to the 250 space had to be come.
It had to be, yeah. We had to come up with a solution to that, and the 250 solution wasn't as hard, really, in some ways, as fixing the 50s. What about actually launching the 250? Tell us about your experiences with that, and then also in how you kind of moved into the supply chain end of things.
Yeah. The 250 launch. I mean, we had to start essentially from ground zero. It was a totally different level of manufacturing and supply base than what we had developed for the 50. It was a full hands-on deck. I think we were there 12 hours a day for a year and a half straight, every day to make the 250 launch possible. It also helped that we all lived very close to the shop at that point in time. And developing that supply chain, we had a lot to learn. Just moving to a point where it's a sustainable business and not just buying onesie twosies of parts. I still think one of my favorite moments was I think I ordered 45 Biltwell grips at a time, and I got a call from them. They called me and they went, "Are you sure you didn't mess up the order?" Because nobody orders 45 sets of grips at one time. And I went, "No, actually, I think I need 50 sets, not 45 that I ordered. Can you change the order for me?" And that was part of that whole supply based transformation that we went through at that point in time. Was we got to a point where we were gearing up to order larger quantities because we knew we would sell more motorcycles. The interesting part, I think, was the launch was the Flight of the Phoenix party.
That's like 10 years and a week ago, as of right now. And that's where we unveiled them to the community. Really, it was just a local thing and celebrated. We had them parked we had lights on them, and cleaned up the shop.
That was probably the closest moment we ever got to our biker build off meltdown. Were the 2 days before, because the bikes were not done. The bikes were not done before the Flight of the Phoenix party. I can remember sitting with Ken Miller. I think there's a video out there of the first start.
Yep.
Has it got gas in it?
No, I think what you said was, "Did you check for spark?" That's what you said.
Oh, that's what it was. Did you check for spark?
And you got a very salty response from Ken Miller.
Yes. Our very seasoned, electrically biased engineer was, "Yes, I did."
In a little bit shorter, in a shorter phrase.
Yeah. There with several more expletives, I believe, because he was pretty free with those, as you would expect. The other one was, I remember I broke the exhaust head stud.
I remember watching you do that and going, "Ah," and then
oh, that's not good. I think we had a motor that we pulled the extra exhaust stud off of. We didn't have a supply of extra exhaust studs, but we had a backup. It was fine.
Talk about your memory of how we started actually selling the bikes and delivering them.
So the first couple bikes sold at the Flight of the Phoenix party. I believe we sold 2 or 3. And as kind of a result of the launch, we were already in the works with the Kickstarter. Our Kickstarter was focused on the launch of the 250s and the launch of the bag line at that point.
And then the proceeds, the goal was to pay for EPA, right?
Yes, that was the eventual goal. I think we all had much higher aspirations, but that was our base goal, and we overcame that. And I believe we got to a second or third level stretch goal at one point. So we paid for EPA with that, but it was just another way to get the name out there.
And that's really what the most effective, the end result was, that we ended up finding some investors through the press we got as a result of that.
Around that time was right after the Flight of the Phoenix party, and through that open door first Discovery Day policy was when Bruce and Matt came in for the first time, our first investors. And it wasn't it wasn't a situation where 2 guys in suits walked in, wanted to plop down millions of dollars. It was, I believe they had just seen this article in the paper and wanted to learn more about it. It wasn't we want to invest. It was tell us more about this. I think at one point I was trying to sell them both a bike, and then you came up and you were trying to sell them a bike, It didn't cross our mind that we were trying to sell them a bike. We were selling them the idea of investing in a small company. And
Mhm.
but the original feeling and the original way we portrayed the company made that possible. So that's my memory of meeting them for the first time, and that was just a little bit after the Flight of the Phoenix party.
Last couple of things we can kind of cover would be going through EPA testing and the whole process of even finding an EPA consultant and getting into production, how you really helped us with the supply chain, and then kind of how your career has progressed since then.
I don't think there was any naivete about the fact that this was going to be difficult. We knew we were putting the first carbureted bike through EPA testing in probably 10 years outside of a 50cc scooter or below.
Probably the last.
And yeah, probably the last. If you get another one through, let me know. But probably need some notes. I can remember on paper having the information on what we needed to pass, what some of the strategies were to make a 250cc carbureted engine pass, because there were other powertrains that had passed several years prior that we took notes off of. We benchmarked some early examples of that helped us. We had Ken, that was an instrumental part with the fueling system and trying to get the fuel air mixture lean enough to adequately combust through the catalyst.
Stoichiometric ratio.
Yeah, stoichiometric ratio
14.7 to 1.
that ran the course of probably about 8 or 9 months of trying to get it to pass, failing, continually spending more money that at that point we didn't have to try to get this to pass. We found S&S, which from the Harley perspective is always a bittersweet thing to talk about. But from our testing perspective, there was no better partner to work with than S&S. It was motorcycle guys who wanted to see someone else succeed.
No, and they were able to give us the assistance in the engineering that we really needed as people who were not experts in that. And so I made many trips up there to Wisconsin to work with them, and I'm still sending Jan emails on a weekly basis. As you kind of shifted more towards supply chain management, how you helped us with that, and even on the financial level, you were really instrumental there, and then how that kind of gave you some direction with where you are now with Harley-Davidson.
From the beginning, it was a you wear many hats type of scenario. But we after probably, I think, a year and a half, we kind of demarcated where our strengths and weaknesses lied at, and I kind of fell into the supply chain. I believe my title at that point in time was operations management, but that meant a lot of things. That meant running the operations portion, making sure scheduling was correct, making sure we had parts coming in on time. That fed into supply chain management. The 250 portion of my career at Janus was the start of my product development career, and there were a lot of formative experiences that came out of that I'm not sure I could have gotten anywhere else. At Harley, we don't develop a new model in a year and a half. That would be an incredible challenge to have happen. It still is one of the pins in my hat on my career that we were able to do that. It was just this huge crossover between everything that we all needed to do to run a business. I joke now that from a supply chain perspective, I've never gotten closer to my engineers than having you directly behind me at my desk. Our desks we didn't face each other, thankfully, because that would have been awkward. But we sat directly. If you scooted your chair out far enough, I was not able to get out completely from my desk. Was how close we sat. So you just turned around and you can answer the question, which is none of my engineers today want to get that close to me, I don't blame them. But that was the environment that we had, and everything from a design supply chain perspective was instantaneous because you turned around and you asked the question. We made sourcing decisions on the fly. I can remember designing the other part that is difficult to relate to Harley-Davidson today is the level of vertical integration at Janus.
Probably more so now than when you were here.
Yeah. I mean, because we had the fabrication shop that we contracted with, but you guys do the 450 frames in house now. You do the fender forming. It went from being a incredibly local sourced product as far as part percentage wise to an incredibly vertically sourced product from a US manufacturing perspective.
But the other thing we were doing was we were like, okay, headlights, turn indicators, starting from absolute scratch, no experience. Where do we find these? Where can we find a reliable source of? And they can't just be any. They have to be DOT approved, and they have to be in this configuration. We remember measuring out. It's got to be 9 inches, between the lights, and they have to be this configuration. And you have to have this kind of turn indicator or reflectors on the front and the back. A lot of that homework we did is still what we base our designs on today.
Yeah, there's a specific surface area for reflector areas and the distance between turn signals. There's the lighting aspect that I'll be honest, we spend a lot of time at Harley on that is amazing. I can spout off those numbers and still have it be relevant today when I talk about lighting. But the other one was the suspension setup for the leading link that was incredibly intensive to do for such a lightweight motorcycle. And we spent months on it. I can remember that. And finally, we found Icon that I think we talked to Olin's at one point. They were very nice,
Yep.
but we were a very small fish in their pond. And then at one point, I think we met Jeff at actually Barber.
Well, we'd been working with him up till then, but I remember we finally got to meet him, and I've since run into him several times. And again, I'm in communication with him on a weekly basis.
Yeah. It went from a source of we're just buying these shocks out to try to a real development partner that was willing to work with us, which I think is the one part of the Janus story that is probably the most impactful that has been to my career. Is you reach a lot of points even today in my work that you're not the highest value, highest profit customer when you're in the motorcycle industry, and being able to talk through problems, be relatable, and sharing a common passion for what you're trying to accomplish with suppliers has been an invaluable lesson that I still utilize today. There's Jeff from Icon. There was Joe Scavone, who I used to call on his vacation.
Cycle Terminal.
I've actually ordered stuff from Joe post working at Janus. That's how ubiquitous his supply is.
You mean not for Harley-Davidson?
No, not for Harley-Davidson personally. No, that would be a great story if I ordered
out of a garage in New Jersey.
Yeah. Joe Scavone, New Jersey, runs Cycle Terminal. He has all of your late model Honda wiring harness and terminal needs and lighting solutions, handlebar controls, all of that connector wise. It's some of those little things that were the most difficult to integrate into the motorcycle because we weren't starting from a position of having an unlimited budget to be able to design all this from scratch.
Or 100 years of history behind you and established partners from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. Today, I would probably design a connector and have it molded. I would design an electrical terminal boot and have it manufactured. We didn't have that luxury at Janus. Another great story is when we made our wiring harnesses. We had a very difficult time in the beginning finding a wiring harness manufacturer that would work with us. I laid out the board to make the wiring harnesses based off of.
That's right.
I believe it was ATC that we went and we went and toured.
Local trailer manufacturer.
Yeah, aluminum trailer company. Yeah, we went and toured their facility, and we modeled our electrical board off what they were doing. And at a certain point, we couldn't find anybody to work with us, so we made it in house.
We still have that board up on the wall as a relic in the assembly bay.
That makes me feel good that the wiring board is still there.
Well, we have so many people like yourself and Walter and Tom and Ken and just people who are in the community or who have been drawn, come in and helped at Janus over the years on varying levels, everything from internships to many years like you, employee, to people that just in the community that want to lend a hand.
I think that's part of the magic of the story. Being from a position that's removed, right? I'm in the industry, and it's very commercially heavily focused. Just the part of the Janus experience that can't be discounted, and it has to be part of the conversation for the development of the 250, especially, was just the general interest and kindness of people who wanted to help and see us succeed, because we didn't have anything else to offer them at that point in time. It was good conversation, maybe some beer, and just being genuinely interested in what we were trying to do. That was the most we could offer most of the people who helped us at that point in time.
Making wonderful machines.
Building wonderful machines. So it's something that you can't tell that story without, you can't tell the story of the 250 launch without the generosity of others that made it happen.
That's why I think it's just so fitting that we were able to get you on this evening and kind of reminisce about, I mean, first Janus employee who has gone on to do what he set up at Janus at a bigger manufacturer. How long were you at Janus?
Yeah, I was at Janus a little bit over 3 years. I think close to 3.5. The motorcycle industry in general was always something that I wanted to pursue. Janus Motorcycles prepared me for the next step in my career, which was moving through several different portions of the Harley-Davidson organization: supply chain management, commodity management, new product development, and finally landing on my career path today as a new product supply analyst, building the latest and greatest Harley-Davidsons. And I mean, even to the point of all of the different aspects of the motorcycle. We talked about the front suspension, we talked about the lighting. My main focus is in powertrain, but I've branched out to wheels, I've branched out to paint, I've branched out to several aspects of the chassis systems. I haven't gotten to shocks yet, but we'll get there eventually. So it's all been a great segue into a wonderful career in the motorcycle industry. But I'm very thankful for the opportunity that the early days of Janus 250 development allowed me to get experience in. I wouldn't be where I'm at today with the you allowing me to come sweep the floor and just sweep the floor and work on 50cc motorcycle engines. That I maybe would have became a lawyer. Who knows? Lawyer, doctor, something.
Right. Do you have one last memorable moment from the early days of the 250 line you can share with us?
Actually, my favorite. I have a favorite, and it's not a particularly expansive memory, but it was the moment you explained CAD to me, but not CAD in a traditional sense, but cardboard aided design. And it's not
a cardboard aided design.
And the best part was the way you explained it to me. It's not like you sat down and were telling me about it. You were building a cardboard model of what would become the Phoenix tank while you were telling me about cardboard aided design. So this is why I'm doing this. This is how you have to make sure the cardboard lays correctly, because you guys did a fair amount of cardboard aided design for the expansion chambers. But I can remember it wasn't just you explaining it to me. It was you doing it while you're explaining it to me on the railing of the mezzanine, if I remember correctly, cutting out this cardboard saying, I like that corner. You have the French square out. Like, okay, this one, cut a little bit more off there. And that one will always stick with me.
Well, Devin, it's been a pleasure to reminisce about the early days and kind of look. It's been 10 years of a model line, which is, it's still kind of sinking into me, really, that, I mean, a decade, the KLR, the original KLR, ran for 40 something years, around 40 years. We're a quarter of the way there with the Halcyon 250. That's something to celebrate. So it's really fun. I mean, some of the memories you're sharing, I did not remember. So much appreciated. We're really glad we can share them with everybody through an interview like this, and it's good to just catch up. Although you're always passing through on a motorcycle, and I think you were here a couple of months ago.
I'm originally from Michigan, so anytime I get the chance to stop by, as anyone should, they should stop by the Janus shop to see what's new, see what's happening.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dewey, and we will catch you the next time you're passing through Goshen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Richard.